Now in 3D view, you have two little things, two little extra menus or sub menus. So you have the little plus here, you can just bring them out here. You can also open them up in view, so you can toggle properties and toggle tool shelf, and you can press T for tool shelf and N to open up the properties editor. So most of the time I like to leave the property editor closed and the tool shelf open. Sometimes I just leave the tool shelf out of it because it's nice to have a big 3D view. To make the 3D view the main highlight, you press Shift Space or Shift Space again to get rid of it. So there, that's basically the menu system of Blender. Now, in Blender itself, you select things with right click. So if I was to press A, now what A does is it selects everything that's in the scene and deselects everything that's in the scene. Now to select something, you right click it. It's kind of it's different from other programs where you normally left click to select something, but it has its reasons for doing it. It's because left click is used for it's sort of used as a confirmation command, so it kind of does, you don't want it to get in the way of selecting objects. Now to move objects around, you press G, which is grab, or to rotate them, or you can scale them with S. Now all those options are also in here. You can scale manipulate, rotation manipulate, and whatnot. So if I want to open up that thing, I can just scale, rotate, manipulate, and whatnot, and it gives you those little highlighters. If you left click on them, it'll let you change them. Now say you wanted to rotate along a certain axis, you can press X, you can press Y and Z, and that'll let you do things along a certain axis. Say I wanted to move things only along the Y axis, I just press Y, and then you can drag it along the Y axis, or X, and then you left click to confirm your placement of it. Now to actually there's several types of modes in this window, like all other windows, but this one there's two main modes which you'll use for basically shaping an object, which is edit mode, which lets you edit the individual portions of a mesh, and there's object mode. Now to actually move around Blender itself, the window itself, what you're seeing through, the viewport as it's called, you're kind of, when you're moving things and when you're moving yourself through Blender, I like to think that you have to kind of think like a crab. You don't move forward and back. As a human being, we're just used to moving forward and back. You can only move, well, you can technically move forward and back, but most of the time, most Blender artists spend their time moving left and right. Now, to actually zoom in and out, you scroll in and out. You can also press Control and middle mouse button, and that'll let you zoom in and out. Now to move left and right, which is the scuttling action I was talking about earlier, you press Shift and middle mouse button, and you move left and right, or you can move up and down. So to move in that way, or scuttle as I call it, you just basically Shift and middle mouse button. Now to rotate, you just press middle mouse button on its own. Now you sort of rotate a virtual point out in space. If you zoom right in, you can kind of move around like you're in a first-person shooter. But it's not that good. I advise you not to basically work like that. I advise you to orbit the point. The other thing you can do is you can actually move forward and back. Now, a lot of Blender artists, they say zooming is moving forward and back. Zooming is changing how things shrink into the background, and you can only zoom up to a certain point. So say I made say the point for now, I'll make it this cursor here. Now the cursor you move around by left clicking, just to let you know, and the cursor is where you place objects. Now to make the cursor your center view of the view, you press Control and the little period button on the numpad, so the little full stop button on the numpad, and that lets you orbit the cursor. So the cursor becomes the orbit point. Now to move forward and back in 3D space, you can only do this in perspective mode. You can't do it in orthographic mode. Orthographic mode is you press 5 on the numpad and you change into orthographic view. Now orthographic view, what orthographic view means is nothing shrinks into the background, so everything stays the same side. It's basically what tunnel vision is. and that's what orthographic view is. Now if you press Control Shift, you tend to if you press Control Shift, you'll move forward and back that virtual point. See now if I orbit now, it's actually that virtual point appears to be behind the cursor. So Control Shift and middle mouse button is to move forward and back. So remember that Control Shift middle mouse button is to move forward and back in perspective mode. So that's how you move around in Blender. Now there's a lot of people when they edit, they change between 3 main views. Now the 3 main views are all happen in the center of the Blender map, and they're used with 1, 3 and 7 on the numpad. 1 is the front, 7 is the side, or no, sorry, 3 is the side and 7 is the top. Now if you go into orthographic view, it kind of looks more simpler. So that's the front, that's the side, and that's the top. 1's the front, 3's the side, and that's the top. Now when you're moving your mouse around in any perspective, not just orthographic perspective, whether it's in perspective view or not, you're kind of moving in a virtual left and right position. You can't move away and towards the camera very well. You can technically if you constrain the way something is moving along a certain axis, but it tends to not work too well. So your best bet is if I grab this, it'll only move left and right and up and down, and it'll only move in the perspective that I'm in. So if I go down, it won't move in the Z perspective. It'll move as it towards down is to me rather than down is to the world. Now if I want to move it down as in Z, I can press Z and it'll move down and up along Z. Now they're the main ways you navigate and move through Blender. I kind of think that most people, the most way you work is you kind of work as if you're crabbing things or scuttling them around the screen. So you grab them and you move them left and right, and then you'd orbit to the side and then move them left and right. So when you're in Blender, you tend to when you're doing sort of very mechanical modeling, you'll jump between 1, 3 and 7. I'll just put it on perspective mode. So you'll jump between 1, 3 and 7. And then when you're in when you go to perspective, or you want to do sort of more organic modeling, what you'll do is you'll tend to orbit around a point, and then you'll just grab it and move it left and right, and then orbit around a point to the side to move it forward and back in the other, as if it's in the other perspective. The other thing to note is that if you want to move to a point, say you want that cursor, it's Control full stop in the numpad. So if you press that, that'll make that the center of where you're orbiting. The other thing is, say you want to make a point on, you can snap, say this object, you can snap the cursor to that object, so you can make the object itself the center. Now the snap menu is Shift S, so Shift S, and then you can say cursor to selected, and it'll jump to the center. And then if you press Control full stop on the numpad key, you'll orbit the object center. You also do the same in edit mode. So that's the basic Blender interface. In the next episode, I'll go into modeling more. If you have any questions or queries, throw them up into the comment section. There's one thing I'll mention before I go. Certain Mac users don't have a 3-button mouse. They have a 2-button mouse, and to use the 3-button sort of way of doing things, what you need to do is you need to go into user preferences, go to inputs, and press the emulate 3-button mouse. And what that does is if you press Alt and left click, it'll move. Actually, I'll do it now real quick. Control Alt U, emulate a 3 mouse button. Now if you press Alt and left click, you'll orbit. If you press Control Alt, you'll zoom. And if you press Shift Alt, you'll scuttle. So they're the basic 3-button commands. And if you press Control Shift Alt, you'll sort of you'll basically dolly forward or dolly back, move forward or move back. So if you're a Mac user, that's what you have to do. If you have any questions or comments, as I said earlier, throw them up in the comment section. And thanks for watching. Throw up a like or subscribe.